Minimalism was born as a self-conscious movement in New York in the early 1960s. Its leading figures included Frank Stella, Donald Judd, Sol LeWitt, and Dan Flavin. Minimalism was one of the many labels applied by critics to describe the simple geometric structures that these artists were producing. Much of the minimalist techniques and styles was shaped by a reaction against abstract expressionism. Minimalists attempted to remove the appearance and composition from their work. They used art styles which would lead to the sense that the meaning of the object lay not inside it, but rather on the surface of the piece. The new style emerged from the viewer's interaction with the object. Minimalist paintings are very precise, and they usually include abrupt transitions between color areas. They incorporate geometric forms which result in flat, two-dimensional space. To highlight the differences in the sculptures between the different parts of the whole piece, minimal objects or sculptures were often several arrangements of simple geometric bodies such as cubes. Sculptures encouraged the viewers to be conscious of the space. They also shared common space as simple as other objects in the world. Frank Stella was one of the most well-known minimalist painters in the 1960s and 1970s. In 1959, Frank Stella gained early recognition with his series of black-striped paintings that changed the way people looked at abstract expressionism. Stella used his painting series to lead the abstract expressionism movement. His black painting series consisted of detailed parallel black stripes which were produced by smoothly applied paint. They were created on a much thicker canvas rather than the conventional canvases, because the thicker pattern served as an elastronic space out of the painting at a constant rate, according to Stella. This series was intended to emphasize the flatness of the canvas and change the viewer's awareness of paintings as two-dimensional surface covered with paint, thereby changing the notion of painting as a window onto three-dimensional space that emerged in the earlier art movements. Black paintings also served as an important transition from abstract expressionism to minimal art. Frank Stella created complicated works that seemed to follow a natural progression, dynamism, and scale. Stella focused on the basic elements of artwork: color, shape, and composition. He expanded his original monochrome palette to bright colors, as well as expanding his moving painting to three dimensions through the use of other elements. Stella believed that colors are chosen, not based on what a color something is supposed to be, but what it should be. Italian painter Caravaggio developed illusionistic tricks that suggested that their subjects emerge out of the canvas and into space of the viewer. Several centuries later, Stella took his innovation one step further by literally extending painting into the third dimension in his painterly reliefs, which entered the viewer's space with the incorporation of protruding materials. This explored the tension of the colors on a flat surface of the canvas, as well as the optical effect of the protruding. Frank Stella is one of the greatest living artists whose impact is felt in the world of many contemporary American artists and styles. Stella's ideas also inspired other major theorists of the period, such as Carl Andre and Donald Judd. Donald Judd was an American artist whose rejection of both traditional painting and sculpture led him to create a new type of art built upon the idea of the object as it exists in the environment. Judd combined the use of highly furnished industrial materials such as iron, steel, plastic, and plexiglass to give his work an impersonal, factory-made look and feel to it. Judd's goal was to make objects that stood on their own as part of a larger field of image making, and make objects that did not allude to anything beyond their own physical appearance. This work represents one of Judd's early styles in the minimalism movement. This work exists as an object rather than as something that belongs to the privileged and to the remote world of art. As an artist, Judd was beginning to see the importance of the environment on how a piece is perceived. In this piece, he places a simple rectangular formed object directly onto the floor of the gallery so that it demands recognition through its materiality as well as through the fact that it changes upon the viewer's passage through the space. After the creation of this piece, Judd began to use a new visual language for three-dimensional form. It was one that emphasizes simplicity and the physical nature of the piece. By the 1970s, Judd's specific objects, as he referred to them, had become complex through his use of color and surface. For Judd, color and material always remained central to his conception of art. The stacks use colors as do painted works, but they protrude from the walls so that the wall becomes a part of the piece as well. In 1972, Judd created another piece. The outer surface is composed of copper, an industrial material, and the inner surface is colored lightly with a highly saturated red. The red interior also contrasts with the copper and was supposed to deepen the viewer's experience by forcing them to think about the relationship between the inside and outside, and to make them question the effects of the different surface values. The piece is in some ways the exact opposite of what people tend to perceive. The tendency for humans to extend the vertical orientation of their own bodies to see human forms in sculpture, which was traditionally vertically oriented. Instead of seeing the world in a reflection of that usual vertical orientation of the human form, or organic form, here we have a piece that is more horizontal than vertical and contains many empty space. By the 1980s, Donald Judd turned to the creation of vertically suspended stacks whose emphasis was on the strength of the piece. Like I said before, this piece suggests a repetition of the observer's own body. This fact creates a strong relationship between two completely different materials. The use of two different materials, aluminum and plexiglass, again offers the viewers two experiences. From the front, the observer is drawn into the depths of the space, while from the side, the piece presents itself as projecting into space. Judd himself said the works were neither painting nor sculpture, and in this matter, he has created an entirely new art. Sol LeWitt earned a place in history of art for his leading role in the conceptual art movement. His belief as an artist created the transition from modern to postmodern era. LeWitt's work ranged from sculpture, painting, and drawing to almost exclusively conceptual pieces that existed as the ideas of elements of the artistic process itself. He placed his emphasis on the process and materials rather than the meaning or specific messages of a piece. His pieces did not require meaning. LeWitt's work consisted of lines, basic colors, and simplified shapes. He applied them to many formulas that he created himself. Like many other minimalist artists, LeWitt used traditional materials such as wood, canvases, and paints, but he made sure to focus on the specific concept of the piece. He left the traditional materials to speak for themselves, to demonstrate their own vulnerability to decay or to destruction. The direction for producing a work of art became the work itself. A work was no longer required to have an actual material presence in order to be considered art. LeWitt's conceptual pieces often took on at least some kind of basic form, although not necessarily in his own hand. LeWitt would provide an assistant or group of assistants with direction for producing a work of art. The instructions were deliberately vague so that the end result was not completely controlled by the artist that conceived the work. In this way, LeWitt challenged some very fundamental beliefs of art, including the authority of the artist in the production of a work of art. LeWitt used traditional materials, oil and pigment on wood when he produced Wall Structure Blue. The piece is a colorful square within a framework of a larger square. That image is supposed to imitate the traditional painting with the red bullseye in the center that calls attention to itself. The simple yet striking square in the middle of the canvas is significant of Jasper Johns' handling of the target pieces, which LeWitt had seen at an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art around the time he produced this piece. This minimalist painting marks a definite break with LeWitt's earlier bodies of work, which made use of language and human figures, compared to works now that involved simplified and abstract objects. The cubes in this piece allowed LeWitt to study the association of different sizes and shapes, arranged according to certain rules and ideas that were already created. When you look at this piece as a whole, it appears to look like a city. It also shows itself as a framework for a finished work or a series of works, by kind of imitating the sketches that precede blueprints and completed structures. LeWitt challenges the typical methods of artistic production. In this instant, he stops the process of sculpting and allows the viewer to observe what would have only existed beneath the other materials. He makes the piece look like it is not finished, but it is, and that is why LeWitt challenged the normal methods of creating art. Dan Flavin was not like other minimalist artists during his time. Even though Flavin was a painter, he was known for his work that he created with another material. Flavin created art by using another material, fluorescent lights. He began incorporating fluorescent lights into his work in the early 1960s with his breakthrough called Icon series. Working with prefabricated materials allowed him to focus on the light itself and the way in which it transformed the space that the exhibition was located in. The tendency for Flavin to prefer prefabricated industrial materials and simple geometric forms together, where the emphasis was placed on the physical space occupied by the artwork rather than the meaning itself, as well as the viewer's interaction, is what aligns Flavin's work with that of other minimalists. Dan Flavin explored themes related to space and light. He used fluorescent light types and regarded the space in which they are installed as part of the piece. With the effect of light and space taking the place of ordinary objects, the work became dematerialized. This piece is one of the pieces in Flavin's Icon series. They were 8 colored square box forms that were constructed with fluorescent lamps and incandescent bulbs attached to their sides and sometimes beveled edges. Most of Flavin's work were untitled and were created as a dedication to friends, artists, critics, and other individuals. His piece, Icon 5, Corin Broadway's Flesh, was intended as a tribute to a young English homosexual who loved New York City. The 28 bulbs surrounding the painted wooden ground were designed as the artists as candle lights. According to Flavin, they gave the surface a rosy, flesh-like impression that generates a type of glow that stands in contrast to the bold coloring of Flavin's other icons. Flavin himself remarked on this work, "Beyond structure and phenomenon, I have tried to infect my icon with a black magic, which is my art. I know this is hard to cope with, but I have succeeded. Corin's Broadway Flesh, you will hold you simply." Here are some other pieces that were featured in the Icon series. Over the decades that followed, Flavin continued to use fluorescent lights to explore color, light, space in works that filled galleries. He began to make use of variety forms, including corner pieces, barriers, and corridors. Dan Flavin created a very famous pieces known as Monuments to V. Tatlin, in homage to Russian conservative sculptor Vladimir Tatlin, which he continued to produce between 1964 and 1990. They were 39 monument pieces that were created for Tatlin. These pieces were an arrangement of tubes that recall Vladimir Tatlin's efforts to combine aesthetics and technology. Flavin's monuments were made out of light bulbs that were either burned out or turned off, which have an element of impermanence that is used to remember the ghost of Tatlin's unrecognized projects. As Flavin stated, these pseudo-monument structural designs for clear but temporary cool white fluorescent lights were to honor the artist ironically. By the late 1960s, minimalism was beginning to show signs of breaking apart as a movement because various artists who had been important to the movement and its early development began to move in different directions. When minimalist artists first began to appear, many critics and vocal public figures found it cold, anonymous, and unforgiving. Critics believed that the use of industrial prefabricated materials did not resemble what they believed was art. According to them, minimalist pieces were somehow lacking in aesthetic qualities that art was normally expected to reveal, thus lessening the experience of the viewer. In his essay, Wreckness of Sculpture, critic Clement Greenberg dismissed minimal art as a novelty art. He suggested that the aesthetic surprise a viewer experiences on looking at true works of art is long-lasting and important, while novelty art items provoke no more than a momentary surprise that is superfluous. Another criticism of minimalism was that minimal art blurred the boundaries between art and everyday, therefore undervalued the art object. In his article, Art and Objecthood, art critic Michael Fried published a controversial and influential attack on minimalist sculpture. Unlike Greenberg, who saw minimal art as a merely novelty, Fried saw minimalism as modernism gone wrong. He suggested that if the aim of modernist work was to explore its medium, be it painting, sculpture, or poetry, minimal art had taken this investigation too far, and by referring only to itself, undermined the distinction between art and non-art. Although the original nature of minimalism went out of fashion in the 1980s art world, certain characteristics of the style entered the later generation of artists. Critics do agree that minimalism was a turning point in the history of modernism, and it still remains highly influential today. In recent years, the term minimalist had also been applied to interior, furniture, graphics, and fashion designers whose work contains clean, strong lines and space decorations. So look around you. The things in your home may have been created based on minimalist ideas. In his exploration of formal issues, Stella worked on a series developing increasingly complicated variations on selected themes. In contrast to the monochrome black paintings, the Protractor series, to which Huron 2 belongs, uses a vivid palette and composition consisting of rectangular shapes on curving and circular forms. The stripes are used to showcase the flatness of the piece, reminding the viewer that a painting is just a canvas covered with paint. This concept is reinforced by the use of a shaped canvas, which further denies the painting's status as an illusion and enhances its object-like quality. The Protractor series are circular or curvy works of art. Every shape is defined by a pair of horizontal and vertical lines that intersect at right angles. The gridded pattern that is formed over the decorative arts through the device of a protractor and the use of almost psychedelic color, a combination of acrylic and fluorescent pigments. Stella brought abstraction and decorative pattern painting into a manner that challenged the conventions of both traditions. Frank Stella created another set of series called irregular polygons that were based on simple geometric shapes. Each of the compositions in it combined varying number of shapes to create daringly irregular outlines. Stella made 4 versions of each composition and varied the colors for each of them. This marked a radical shift from Stella's earlier striped works in their use of large fields of color. Frank Stella is one of the greatest living artists whose impact is felt in the works of many American artists and style. He never regarded himself as a minimalist, but his black paintings secured their place in history by inspiring artists such as Carl Andre to create sculptural objects that have no expressive content, and they were only marked by their appearance and their anonymous use of repeated forms. Stella's color variations and the exploration of circular motifs and shapes influenced many other artists, as well as it served as a catalyst basis for the developments of such fields of color fielding painting and post-painterly abstraction. Art critics took much from Stella as well. Clement Greenberg famously said, "Where the old masters created an illusion of space into which one could imagine walking, the illusion created by a modernist is one by which one can look, can travel through, only with the eye." Greenberg came up with the concept of flatness and the integrity of a plane and optical integrity from the works of Stella and other modernists of the time. In 1968, Judd purchased a 5-story cast-iron building located in New York City. The building was his home, and it also reflects his minimalist aesthetics. It contains Judd's own furniture designs and other artworks, and the space has been dubbed by the birthplace of permanent installation. You want to note that the rectangular forms that dominate the interior, such as the tables, windows, and frames, are used as reflections of the grid-like form that comprise the building and the windows of Lower Manhattan. As Judd once said, "Art and architecture, all the arts, do not exist in isolation as they do now. The fault is very much the key to the present society. Architecture is nearly gone, but all of the arts, in fact, parts of the art society, have to be rejoined and joined more than they ever have been." That was Judd's own quotes, which he used to apply to build his room and house. Sola Witt was always willing to exchange his own work with anyone, whether amateur or well-established artist. He encouraged the kind of support network in the visual arts. This enabled him to have a large collection from local and international artists. He was the founder of Printed Matter, a nonprofit organization that promotes book arts and maintains the exhibition space in Chelsea. He also established a fund for artist work, which makes it possible for donations for artists to continue making their work in New York City. Dan Flavin's light art falls well within the minimalism category, but it makes an important departure from minimalism due to the fact that fluorescent tubes eventually burn out. But even though they burn out, the quality of light is really good otherwise to standards compared to standards such as steel, aluminum, concrete, plastic, glass, etc. So that makes Flavin's legacy less about his work as a significant minimal artist, but then its ability to look beyond the movement and even stand outside of the real artistic movement. He also paved the way for many other artists including Robert Irwin, James Tullis, Spencer Finch, and others. The characteristics of minimalism include clarity and simplicity of form, no narrative, no specific content or references, emphasis on pure shapes, often monochromatic surfaces. Installation art was a large product of the years that followed the dominance of abstract expressionism and minimalism. In today's societies, many minimalist artists have begun to create pieces known as installation art. Installation art is called site-specific art, meaning that the site or the place is the only place where the site or the object can be shown. Once the object is removed from the site, the object ceases to exist, because it only exists for the viewer and has no life or purpose outside of the specific space. An installation is a temporary arrangement of objects in a space, usually a museum or a gallery room, and it can also be mounted anywhere, inside or outside. Minimalists wanted their viewers to experience their work without the distractions of the normal everyday traditional artwork such as composition, theme, and other elements. The medium and the material of the work was its reality, and was what the minimal artist wanted to portray. The materials that were used just because. They were not used to symbolize anything or mean anything. Also, color was not used to express feeling or mood, but simply to be used as a way to interact with the space. The work tried to evoke a response from the viewers in terms of their relationship between the elements of the work and their thoughts of it. Minimalists rejected the idea that art should reflect personal expression of the creator. It shouldn't. It should express their reaction. Minimalism questioned the nature of art and its place in society, although some deal in the 1970s. In 1959, Frank Stella gained early recognition with his series of black striped paintings that changed the way people looked at abstract expressionism. Stella used his painting series to lead the abstract expressionism movement. His black painting series consisted of detailed parallel black stripes which were produced by smoothly applied paint. They were created on a much thicker canvas rather than the conventional canvases, because the thicker pattern served as an elastic space out of the painting at a constant rate, according to Stella. This series was intended to emphasize the flatness of the canvas and change the viewer's awareness of paintings as two-dimensional surface covered with paint, thereby changing with the object. Minimalist paintings are very precise, and they usually include abrupt transitions between color areas. They incorporate geometric forms which result in flat, two-dimensional space. To highlight the differences in the sculptures between the different parts of the whole piece, minimal objects or sculptures were often several arrangements of simple geometric bodies such as cubes. Sculptures encouraged the viewers to be conscious of the space. They also shared common space as simple as other objects in the world. Frank Stella was one of the most well-known minimalist painters in the 1960s and 1970s. Minimalism was born as a self-conscious movement in New York in the early 1960s. Its leading figures included Frank Stella, Donald Judd, Sol LeWitt, and Dan Flavin. Minimalism was one of the many labels applied by critics to describe the simple geometric structures that these artists were producing. Much of the minimalist techniques and styles was shaped by a reaction against abstract expressionism. Minimalists attempted to remove the appearance and composition from their work. They used art styles which would lead to the sense that the meaning of the object lay not inside it, but rather on the surface of the piece. The new style emerged from the viewer's interaction is supposed to be, but what it should be. Italian painter Caravaggio developed illusionistic tricks that suggested that their subjects emerge out of the canvas and into space of the viewer. Several centuries later, Stella took his innovation one step further by literally extending painting into the third dimension in his painterly reliefs, which entered the viewer's space with the incorporation of protruding materials. This explored the tension of the colors on a flat surface of the canvas, as well as the optical effect of the protruding. Frank Stella is one of the greatest living artists whose impact is felt in the world of many contemporary American artists and styles. Stella's ideas also inspired others, changing the notion of painting as a window onto three-dimensional space that emerged in the earlier art movements. Black paintings also served as an important transition from abstract expressionism to minimal art. Frank Stella created complicated works that seemed to follow a natural progression, dynamism, and scale. Stella focused on the basic elements of artwork: color, shape, and composition. He expanded his original monochrome palette to bright colors, as well as expanding his moving painting to three dimensions through the use of other elements. Stella believed that colors are chosen, not based on what color something